Welcome everyone to the Stepping Up webinar hosted by Youth Science Canada. Today we'll be focusing on bringing your projects to the next level. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A section of this webinar, keeping in mind you must be logged into your Google account. You can also use the hashtag CWSF on Twitter. And today I'm joined by two other Canada-wide Science Fair alumni.
Hi, I'm Farouk Salwani. I've been a participant at the Canada-wide for 4 times, and I'm a third year in biochem at Moncton in Moncton.
And I'm Kate Berger. I'm currently living in Vancouver. I study chemical biology at UBC. I'm in my 3rd year, and I also participated in 4 Canada-wide science fairs.
And my name is Emily Lenevue. I'm in my 1st year of biotechnology at Loyalist. I also play volleyball, and I have done 3 Canada-wide science fairs. So in our first webinar, if you did happen to catch it, we had our first webinar just on the project itself and kind of getting started, and this one is going to be focusing on stepping up our project. So now that we've made it this far and we already have our project started, what do we do next?
Well, first up, we can ask, what does taking your work to the next level actually mean, right? So we can think of it this way. It can mean that you want to go more in depth and being more specific to your, to your data. So the more you interpret your data, that's what taking the work to the next level, right? So also, taking your work to the next level might mean impacting the actual real world with more meaningful results. So it can mean actually creating a product, or it can mean just adding to the general knowledge of society. But it might also be on a lesser level as well, so it doesn't have to be that big. So, and another way to taking your work to the next level is just tuning up your presentation and showing excitement and expertise. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I did a project for 2 years. The first year, me and my partner, we took water samples from different areas in our community, and we determined the concentration of parasites at different locations. And then we wanted to take this work to the next level by expanding our results to see how they could be more meaningful to society. So what we wanted to do was extract DNA from all the parasites we'd collected and genotype it, so analyze the DNA to determine what organisms the parasites could infect, because there were several different strains. So we wanted to see whether they could infect humans and dogs or humans and cattle, because that would determine some of the sources that these parasites could get in the environment. And then we could then apply this to human health and determine different sources of pollution in our community.
Right. And a big common theme when it comes to this is definitely just taking your ideas and to bring them in the next level. It's just getting excited about your work and wanting to dig deeper. So another thing is really important is just kind of deciding what that means. So what that could mean is not only taking your research to the next level or also finding new research. So what do you guys think is a really important thing in finding new research and finding a new meaning to your project?
Finding a new meaning to your project is always something that you always want to keep doing because it's the best way to improve your project, right? So what you want to do is always keep thinking about what you're doing and keep improving your data and mostly your knowledge about the subject, right? So if I'm doing a project about breast cancer, I might want to also get more knowledge about other types of cancer, right? So, and maybe apply them to my project, as I did in my days as a finalist. So I started up as a project for breast cancer only, and then I updated my stuff so it could include other types of cancer because I had learned about them throughout all the years. So yeah, that's what it
Yeah,
is.
I think you definitely want to look into research other people have done that's relevant to your project, so you can integrate their knowledge and apply the work you've done to the real world.
For
Right.
sure, I definitely agree with that. It's always important to continue updating yourself, update your research, because you never know in the scientific community. One year something could not have existed, and the next year there are 5, 10 different prototypes on their way. So science is always something that's continuing to evolve, and it's really important to always stay current and keep updated. Which brings us to our next question, which is why take your work to the next level? So what do you guys think, or what is something that might have inspired you guys to take your work on to the next level or just continue it in another year?
So definitely, it helps to better present the impact of your work, right? So if I'm presenting to other people, I like to show them the results. So basically, the more I can help inspire other people, that's my reason for taking my work to the next level. It could also mean the difference between a side project and a project which greatly impacts your surroundings or society in general. So, yeah, so there's many reasons to take your work to the next level. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, like I was talking about earlier with the parasites project I did, one of the reasons I chose to take it to the next level is because I really saw the impact the results could have if we were able to identify exactly what the source of the parasites was. We would be able to look into better ways of removing them and having a cleaner environment, as animals can also get infected with the parasites.
For sure. And another thing about updating yourself is definitely just finding ideas, whether it's building on your ideas or just finding new ones. And there are a lot of great things in your friends, family, and the community, and even some guides that have been created to actually find these ideas. So one for sure is the Stepping Up Guide, which is by Youth Science Canada, and the Stepping Up Guide can be found on the website. And it's just a really good guide to give you ideas, not only that, but also not ideas for your project necessarily, but ideas on how to improve it. What was the way that you guys found new ideas, whether it be research or talking to people? What did you guys find useful?
Well, I think talking with other people that are that have listened to your research, so feedback from the judges. One of my mentors, I actually met him. I met him through him being a judge of my project in the previous year, and he was really interested in what I did, and he offered to let me come work for him, and then I developed more projects that way.
Yeah, and one way for me was really sort of a weird way, but it was I kept reading specific IEEE magazines, right? So engineering stuff. And on my project, even though my project was completely not related to engineering, almost not, so I kept implementing ideas from that and into my project. So that's one way I had to always keep getting new ideas and uh, because the knowledge in general is always useful, right? It never really goes away. So it's really useful.
And like Farouk said, like the knowledge is definitely important, not only for your science fair project, but just for yourself further on in post-secondary education or just for your own knowledge. It's great to have that background information and that research for on various different fronts. Now, yes, there are a lot of great ideas and there's a lot of great things that come from science fair, but don't worry about having challenges. You'll have that moment where you feel like you can't do your project or you feel like something's going wrong, but always remember that there are people around you to encourage you, and there's always kind of, not to sound cliche, but a light at the end of the tunnel, and you'll always kind of find your way out of it as long as you do the right steps, you do your research, and there'll always be people in your entourage to kind of help you figure that out. So what were some of the challenges that you guys faced, and if you don't mind also kind of resuming how you got out of them, or if there was any different roadblocks?
I've definitely had a lot of challenges in my project, mostly because I didn't always have the resources or the people who could help me do my project. Since a lot of my projects were about biology, my my family, like my father and my mother, couldn't help me understand the concepts since they are so removed from that. And I still was in high school, and there wasn't anywhere I could get information. So that's why I try to get more on the internet and read more from other people who what they did on the same topics. So the challenge really was communicating with those people. So emails, text messaging, it was all new to me at that time. So yeah.
For me, I had some things that just didn't work out very well. I was trying to do the amplification of the DNA from the parasites, like I was mentioning earlier, and that process definitely took a lot of troubleshooting, and I actually ended up putting a few years into working on that just to get through several steps of the process. So I think it's important to continue to persevere even if things aren't working right away.
For sure, like perseverance is definitely a big thing. And did you find that taking a moment away from it, or kind of just even taking a week kind of off of science fair and thinking of new things helped, or did you really want to work on it and continue to work on it until you found the results you were looking for?
Well, yeah, I definitely wanted to continue to work on it, but one of the things I also found was for my project, I had several different angles I was looking at things. So when one thing wasn't working, I would kind of develop the other for a bit, so that way I had multiple things to talk about at science fair in case this complicated reaction I was doing never worked out in the end. So yeah, I think it's useful to take a bit of a break and come back to it. You might have a new angle you can come at it, but definitely persevering is key.
Yeah, and for me, I never really went very many days straight working on my project because I always realized that the world around me was my inspiration. So I didn't want to stay too removed because I have a tendency to get sort of obsessed about something and really work on it and only keep working on it until it's done. So, and I realized that that wouldn't work for my project. So what I did was I always worked a bit on it every couple of days, for a few months instead of a few weeks of straight just working on it. So definitely take pauses in between your work. That's a big tip I have to give. And yeah.
All right, kind of on the same theme, we actually have a question coming in from Twitter, which is a little similar to what we've talked about, but maybe from a different angle. A student is wondering what they should do if they're feeling burnt out with their project.
Yeah.
I would suggest doing something similar to what I did, where you had multiple angles you could go at. So when this reaction I was talking about wasn't working, another thing we would do was take different samples from different areas to build on our project in that way. So I think if you're burnt out with a certain aspect of your research, you could look into developing it in a different way, or you could also start a new project as well if you can think of an idea. Maybe it has some relevance to what you're doing before, but I think if you get burnt out, it's important to try looking at things in a different way.
Yeah,
For sure.
and my perspective on it is if you're getting burnt out on anything, not just the project, but on anything, you need to mostly not get out more, but you need to observe other things so that stress is a bit less, you know. So basically, I don't know, go and maybe start reading a book or do something else with your time. That'll really help just alleviate the stress that's on the project. Because you know, if you're too stressed out about one thing, you'll never be able to do it well. So just try to keep the stress at an acceptable level, since it's always useful. But try to see other things in life as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and another thing for sure, like if you're like me, I enjoyed taking some time off when I did feel a little bit burnt out, but at the same time, I almost felt a little frustrated because I felt like I should be working on my science fair project, and it was a little frustrating for me realizing that I had to take time off. So if you're that type of person as well, you can definitely look for other avenues, such as just going back to the research point, forgetting kind of about the experiment for a week, but still researching so you still feel like you're involved for the science fair, and you still feel like you're involved through networking as well. So you can actually network with your entourage, network with your peers, your teachers, and they can also help you. So what did you guys find most helpful when it comes to networking and talking to people?
It was definitely when I'm working with people, it was definitely the way I spoke to them. So basically, when I started doing networking with people, I was always the thing about me is I'm a very straightforward person. So when I was talking to the people, I never really had that tact to ask for help. I was always really, you know, they didn't always take it well. So what I learned to do was talk with a bit more charm to the people who I asked help for, and especially the people that would end up becoming, you know, my test subjects. So yeah.
I think it's important to come prepared with a good summary of your goals when you're asking a mentor for help, or if you're asking other people to be test subjects, or whatever you need. It always helps to be organized if you want to gain access to additional resources.
For sure. And another thing is always to remember that even if you've already have contacts and you feel comfortable with them, halfway through your project, don't forget that you can still go out and network with new people. And it's never a problem to mid-project be like, hey, I think I need another outside view, and go contact some new people.
Yeah, and also remember that a network isn't only for a project, it's for life. So always keep that in mind, and always keep that, you know, take care of that. Networking is a skill that's very useful that you'll develop in science fairs, but that's very useful in life in general, so in business and in life in general. So yeah.
For sure. So we have a question here coming in from the Q&A section. It might be a little bit of a tricky subject, but it's, what if I am always arguing all the time with my project partner?
Do what I did and keep working with that person, and until if there's a flaw somewhere in the relationship that can't work, then just go your different ways. But if you really want to work with that person and it really is useful to the project, or you don't have any other choice, or you're too far along, definitely keep working on that. So just communication is good. So basic.
Yeah, I think sometimes part of the problem might stem from the fact that you and your partner are both going to be really driven people, right? Like, you're both super keen, you're doing this probably advanced research project, and you might not always know what the best angle to take is. And I think if you guys are having trouble deciding that by yourselves, it's important to look into asking someone else. So your mentor, or if you don't have a mentor, just look for any kind of external advice, because at the end of the day, you guys have to get together and present this to the judges in a cohesive manner. So you probably need external input on what the best direction to take with your project is.
For sure. And like personally, I haven't actually had a partner science fair wise, but this is definitely something that's applicable throughout high school and college or university as well, because in a lot of different cases, you'll be working with people, and even on the workforce. So one thing is definitely just to step back from the problem, take a breath. That also kind of goes back with the whole burnt out situation. If you're feeling burnt out or if you're having a problem with anyone. Really just kind of step back from it and talk to the person, and even in a way talk to yourself beforehand, kind of prepare yourself to stay calm, cool, and collected, and keep going from there. So moving on to our next topic, kind of just about asking questions. What are some setbacks that you guys have had when you have tried to approach people, and what would you suggest for people who are kind of a little nervous about the whole mentorship, or even emailing people through the process?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, just be really prepared. If you have a good summary of what you want to do and you've background researched it well, chances are the mentor is probably going to be pretty impressed with you. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask. If they say no, you just move on to someone else, and there's really nothing to lose, even if it feels really nervous.
Yeah, personally, I never really had a mentor per se. I've definitely had people that would help me, but no one really like oversighting my experiment. But definitely, what I would say is don't be ashamed of anything. There is no wrong answer. Not in this, not when you're learning ever. So just keep asking, and and if you think that somebody is can really help you, then don't be afraid to ask. It's really just that.
For sure. Like it's really important to never be afraid to ask, because as I think Kate said this, everyone's going to be really impressed with you no matter what the level of your project is. Just the fact that you went out of your way to approach people, and a lot of people are actually really happy about this. I know actually some of my profs who found out that I was a Canada-wide science fair student and that I did science fairs actually said, oh yeah, I have gotten emails from new students and I'm always so happy to get them. So from their point of view, they're really happy to see that people are engaging in science. So it's really not a problem. Like, don't be afraid. They without hesitation will be able to answer you. And sometimes they're also really busy is something I hear. Like, even they'll be having their TAs like, hey, can you send a quick email? Because they're just really busy. So don't be afraid if they don't answer you right away. It's not necessarily because they don't want to answer you. It's just kind of because they're busy. So moving on to the next topic, so on different subjects in school, like let's say you excel in biology, but you want to do a chemistry project or vice versa. What are your tips and tricks for that sort of thing when you're going outside of your field of study that you prefer?
I think it's important to look into the literature, or even you don't have to start necessarily with the scientific literature, but if it's an area you don't feel comfortable with or you don't have much background knowledge, I think obviously the first thing you want to do is research it and then come up with a project from there.
Yeah, and definitely what you need to remember is the thing about projects, the thing about knowledge is it's all related. So you'll find links between math and biology. That's what I did. My projects were all on biology, right? But that is by far not my strongest point. My strongest point is physics and programming. So what I did was I combined the two, adding my knowledge of programming and computer engineering and everything about that into biology. So if you're feeling unsure about a certain subject, then definitely just keep the literature like data, and always keep reading up on it. That's the best thing. That's the best thing I can tell anybody is to always keep reading on stuff. So anything. So yeah.
Yeah, and for one of my projects, I did a lot of statistical analysis, and that was something I definitely wasn't comfortable in. Even with like a strong math background in high school, I didn't really know what I was doing. So also asking for help in areas like that, like it doesn't necessarily have to be a mentor, it could be someone else. Like I had a mentor, but to do some of the analysis for my data, I actually was in contact with a professor at the college where I was living who taught statistics, and I got a brief lesson from him in how to analyze my data, and that definitely helped in an area that I was not very comfortable with.
For sure. And in which ways can you take that knowledge and understanding and even just your original research to the next level itself in those subjects? What are some ground points that you guys kind of use to just taking it into the next level in general?
Okay, so you're asking if what do you mean?
Like your project itself, how did you kind of take it from one year to the next?
Oh, right. As keep working on it. So
For sure, yeah.
what I had to do was always like I said, there were biology programs, so I always used the same engine, but I always tried to keep improving on it, right? So basically, the project changes, but the core needs to still improve, even if it's the same. So basically, if you're using different algorithms, you might want to step it up and make them more efficient, or keep working on it. So yeah.
Yeah, you can also look into data analysis, like I was talking about. So having more statistics and also having more scientific references, so reviewing the literature more. It doesn't have to necessarily be for the same project, but even between different projects. I know between the first county-wide science fair project I did and then the one I've been talking about, which involved analyzing parasites, I stepped it up in a lot of ways um, through data analysis and through looking at literature and applying my results to the real world.
For sure. And like, what are some like concrete examples on like getting more statistics? Like, do you mean upping your amount of subjects, or like just kind of getting more involved in graphs and stats? Like, what are some really specific key points that you guys noticed that really helped step up your project?
Yeah, I definitely got more involved in stats. So just in case anybody doesn't really know what I mean by that, if you take a lot of data points and you average them, you might have different averages for, let's say, different locations with parasite levels. But you do an analysis to look into the range above and below your errors, and then you can compare the range for the different locations, and then this range will tell you how confident you are in your answers, and judges really like to see that because it gives your results more scientific validity.
For sure.
Indeed, and one thing I did was when I was working with databases, I always tried to find a new database that was more recent and that was more peer-reviewed. So one year I went with a 500 database with 500 results in it, and the next I was with 10,000 results. So I always try to keep finding new data that's more appropriate for my project. And even if it's not that much more, like from 500 to 10,000 or something, it can be just more appropriate to your project specifically. Like it might include more data about a specific type of disease you're trying to work on. Uh, always try to keep it relevant.
For sure. And another thing that I found really useful is just subject size in general. And for me, subjects were actually human because I had human participation. So I had started off in my first year with 30 subjects for my regional fair, which is pretty typical, and regional fairs do recognize that as a fairly good amount. And then I bumped it up to 100 subjects for the nationals on the first year for that particular project, but which is also a fair good amount with 100 human subjects. But just to kind of take it further in the next year, since I had so much more time to do my project and I had already done my ground suit research, I had actually bumped it up to 1,000 subjects. So just kind of going back into your original research and all that is great, but also an easy thing you can do is just adding on to your sample size. Now, for you guys, did you have samples that weren't that were actual samples in the sense that we weren't talking about human subjects, but samples? And what were your typical sizes of those samples?
Well, I took water samples and I also took sewage samples, which is an interesting experience. But sewage samples, I would collect a 1-liter bottle, and water samples, I would collect 20 liters and filter it, and then I would analyze the parasites in the filter. So I guess what I was doing is I was looking into constant volumes of water at each location, and then I had a procedure where I would extract the parasites and count them.
All right, awesome. Oh, go ahead.
I never really had any non-human samples, which is a weird thing to say, but yeah.
Okay, so we have another question coming in, and it is it better to collect your own data or to use public databases? So what are your thoughts on that?
I am definitely an advocate of public databases because it can be hard, depending on what you're working on, of getting your own data. For example, I was doing a program for cancer diagnosis. So what happened was I realized I was a 14-year-old kid who couldn't exactly go and do biopsies on people. So what I had to do was get access to public databases. And there are plenty of really good ones by the World Health Organization, which are reviewed by thousands of doctors throughout the world, not just physicians, but also PhDs in different subjects. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for public databases, and but there's definitely a good side to using your own data.
Yeah, I mean, I've never used a public database, but also the things I've always researched never really had a public database in the first place. There's been a few studies, like I would look into the literature and compare my data to other people's data, but I never searched through their data in a database because there wasn't much data on parasite concentrations in rivers and creeks in different areas. I think one of the advantages, if you want to use your own data, is that it's typically original, unless you're copying somebody else's experiment exactly. Whereas with a database, I think you need to be careful with your interpretation of the data because otherwise you may run the risk of just presenting what somebody else has already presented.
For sure. And also, public databases are really good if it's too hard to collect your own data, as well as if it's a project that's really extensive and you don't necessarily have a lot of time to do it. However, I also am a really big advocate of both because if you're doing public databases, that's great for kind of some ground research and for a really extensive project. But again, your own research and your own data is going to give you a lot of uniqueness, as Kate said. So moving on to the presentation side of things, so not just the project itself, what are some ways you can improve on your presentation and how you present to the judges, the public, and just to your teachers?
Yeah, so you can, again, we were talking about data analysis, but it's also important to make sure that you have a good data analysis on your poster board. So when you're presenting, all the numbers may make sense to you, but to a judge, it's nice to have a graph that you can discuss and point to, and then they can see a nice summary of your results. You also want to have your logbook, obviously, and it's good to explain errors and your inconclusive findings and relate how your project is relevant to the real world in your presentation.
Yeah, definitely. And really, even if you have inconclusive findings, you still need to present those results. Don't try to present them in a positive way. So always try to stay on the positive side of things in a presentation. And yeah, so also my biggest pet peeve when somebody is presenting to me is when the presentation is not adapted to me. It seems like a rehearsed kind of thing. So saying like if I'm presenting to a judge or I'm presenting to a 90-year-old woman or I'm presenting my project to a 5-year-old kid, I'm not going to be saying the same stuff. Definitely not. So what I'm going to be saying is adapted to the person or to the people you are actually talking to. And that's a great tip to have throughout all of your presentations, throughout college, throughout university, throughout anything you like. So
Absolutely.
yeah, always speak to the room you are talking to.
I think it's also really important to be able to summarize your work. You may have a really nice half-an-hour presentation ready, but sometimes the judges might come back, or you'll have just general people that are interested that only want like a 5 to 10 minute summary. And it's definitely important as you progress with your presentation skills to not be too rigid. I think it's still very important to practice, though. So what me and my partner would do is we would start out with something that was pretty rehearsed, but we would practice it until we felt really comfortable with the flow especially if you're in a partner project. You have to be really comfortable going back and forth. So you gotta just practice it. And we also, something we like to do was study with flashcards, which that definitely may be a bit overkill for some people, but I know for me, I've always been very nervous in presenting, and it really helped me to have questions judges typically asked written on a flashcard, and we would practice with what our answers would be. And we also put background information and stuff we had researched on there, so we could get practice talking about that and going over it.
Now, do you guys actually prepare a script, or do you kind of just go over it and then decide what you're going to keep, what you're going to get out, and then have it all not rehearsed and just, for lack of a better term, sort of wing it with a little bit of preparation?
Well, I think it really depends on how comfortable you are with winging it. Some people are really naturally good at that. Well, I wouldn't say we had like something rehearsed, but we definitely had a good outline that we would stick to. And if we wanted to improvise, it would be within the outline, if that is clear. So we would have like a general overview of the order that we were going to say things. And as we got comfortable practicing it, the way we would say these things may change each time we said it, but the overall outline remained the same.
Yeah, I'm definitely the kind of guy that likes to wing things, exams and procrastination and everything. But in my science fairs, I try to, I've always been good in improvisation. So what I did was I always tried to make it interesting for the person I'm presenting to. So I never really, like Kate said, I had a general outline of what I wanted to do. But in the beginning, I'm going to say this and this, but if push comes to shove, I can say this and this as well. So what I always did was I kept a sort of general outline, but the rest I was just whatever came up I would say. And since I really had worked on my project for months and months, I was pretty sure of what I was saying. So I never really went full on like stupid. So I was really always focused, even though it had a feel of improvisation in it. So, but that's definitely because I'm comfortable with it. I don't recommend everybody do it. I definitely know that some people are not able to, do that, and it's not bragging or anything. It's just different kinds of people. I'm not able to, learn a script and say it. I'm just not able to do that. So what I had to do was remediate. So yeah, it's definitely depending on yourself, on what you're capable of, and yeah.
And it should definitely feel like a conversation with your judge. You do want to keep that professionalism, but you also want to have it almost as if you're talking amongst your peers. So you want it to really sound conversational. On that note, we also have a question coming in from Twitter, which is more in regards to the different types of awards, the different types of judges. So the question is, how do I cater my presentation to specific judges? So again, with that general versus special awards in mind.
So before you get to present your project to the judges, that's a little tip I have. What I did was I read where they were from and what universe and what field they were in. So basically, I had one judge that worked at Irving in New Brunswick. So it was petrol and stuff. So I always try to link even though my project wasn't really at all linked with the gas industry, what I tried to do was, oh look, my engine that I use for this project can also be used for different stuff, including corporate, affairs, like with drilling and stuff. So once you get to know the judge, you might want, before you even present it, before you even see him, try to think, oh, I might be able to say this and maybe able to say that. But it's definitely not always a case that you can do, and just try to feel the conversation, how it's going. So if you feel like the judge is responsive to your presentation, keep doing it. If not, then smile and fake it till we make it.
Yeah, so the general awards in the morning is when they consider your project for the medals, and they look into the scientific aspects of your project and how well they think those were done and things like that. And then in the afternoon, when you have the special awards, it's more applicable to a certain topic. So I remember back with my project, one of the things I was judged for had to do with applications towards water quality. So I would emphasize the applications of my research more towards that. So I would talk about how these parasites could be used as an indicator for water quality, and then I would focus less on the human health aspect of it. So like Farouk said, you want to think about what they're looking for, and you have to gear your presentation towards that.
Now, another question that we have is, does it really matter how I dress for judging? And kind of just to also tie that into the rest of the science fair, I'm just going to add also for kind of public viewing and all of the different days, just when it comes to your project. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think it's nice to dress up and to look professional, and I think that will obviously add to your presentation. In terms of how you place, I think it has more to do with the scientific credibility of your project than how you look, though. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't have to be like, I don't know, a Gucci suit or something. I'm not on here.
Yeah. Exactly.
You can just be yourself. That's very important. But dressing nice is always a good first impression. So don't go with torn up jeans and combat boots to a presentation with the Vice Minister of Health. So yeah.
But yeah, just be yourself. You should feel comfortable in what you're wearing. So.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the presentation itself, what do you guys think is a good way kind of just to start off your presentation? I kind of find this question funny because this kind of makes me think of sort of back to grade school. You always start your presentation with, "Hi, my name is Emily and my project is called this." Like that sort of really awkward sort of elementary school thing. But then again, it is kind of hard to kind of exit from that. So what do you guys think would be a good way to start your project, your presentation, that is?
Well, I think it's important to introduce yourself still. Shake the judge's hands. You don't have to necessarily start by reading out your title because it's right there. Just trying to think about how I actually would start out. I think I like to introduce where I'm from, and that also had like a lot of relevance to my project though, because where I was taking samples was where I lived, and then I would show them the map of my city on my poster board, and then things kind of got rolling from there into the background of why I was doing it.
Yeah, and like Kate said, just a good handshake, introducing yourself is very important. But what I always did, and now I realize it, what I always did every time was start up with a small story. That was relevant with my project, mind you. So if I had a project about genetically modified sheep that created a different kind of milk, what I was trying to do was get the story of how I got that idea first. So basically, I visited a farm and I realized about some stuff, and there was this thing that happened. So I always try to start up with a small story about that's relevant to my project, and even if I hadn't lived anything about that thing, what I would do was give a story about something that happened elsewhere. So starting with a small story that doesn't last more than 45 seconds, 1 minute, is a really good way to start. So it puts them into the subject, and it gives them a general idea of how the idea came about. So yeah.
And just one other little thing about your presentation, what I really found helpful, and what some knowledge from us that everyone might find helpful, is that I didn't really expect judges to ask me for a 2-minute version of my presentation, but I actually found later on in the day it's very common. Judges will always come up to you, and then especially for special awards, and say, "Hey, I'm pressed on time. I have maybe 2-3 minutes. Give me the rundown of your project." What are some key elements you guys think that you absolutely have to say, and then the stuff you can kind of leave out because they only have that 2-3 minutes?
I would say, well, what we always did is you want to leave out most of your methods, because you can spend like 10 minutes like going into detail about how you took every single sample, and I feel like at the end of the day that doesn't really add too much to what you're trying to convey. So I think relevant background, your main results, and then your amazing conclusions.
Right, definitely the overlines of the project. So you don't want that story when you're doing that 2-minute thing. What you want to do is give your goal, a very short version of it. You want to really skim through the way you went about experimenting or observing. So you really it's really short, and you pass most of your time on the conclusion and make sure that they understand the results and the impact of your results on your surroundings. So yeah, really focus on the conclusion when asked for 2-minute proofs.
And on that theme, we have another Twitter question, and it's what we should do if we have our project and we're thinking of preparing questions. Should we prepare them, and how would you prepare questions if you do choose to do so?
So you mean like preparing for questions judges may ask?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we always did that with our project. We had flashcards, as I was talking about before. I don't think that's necessarily something you need to do, but I always like to be prepared for questions. It doesn't have to be anything too specific, but I think like basic questions, like the real-world applications, instead of waiting for a judge to ask that, that can be something that you've prepared. And I also think like if you keep getting asked questions over and over again, you might want to be more prepared for them. Something that we noticed is like any questions that came up at our regional fair, we were really prepared for those at nationals.
Yeah, and definitely, I think that if you know your project really well, you sort of know the ways that people can ask questions on your project. So definitely, I knew not my flaws, but my sort of weak points in my project. So I always knew the judges would go for that. So I didn't try to hide my weak points. Instead, when they attacked my weak points, I would always come up with an answer because I always knew what my weak points are. So yeah, don't worry about it. Know your project really well. If you think that there's a question that's obvious and that's going to come up, then there's absolutely no harm, and I recommend actually preparing for it. But if you know your project well enough, you don't really have to worry about it.
Yeah, or even it may be better just to have people practice asking you questions. I mean, you don't need to necessarily be prepared for specific questions, but you do need to be confident at asking something that may come out of the blue, because in reality you can't be prepared for every single question. So it's also best to get practice with being able to think on your feet.
Being able to think on your feet is definitely important, and you'll always get those questions that will definitely throw you off. But a couple that definitely are really common are things like, what's the next step for your project? If you had one more year to complete your project, what would you improve? And a fun one that I remember from a judge was actually not in terms of time, but in terms of money. It was, if you had an unlimited budget, what would you do with your project, which I found was a really fun one. So judges will ask those common ones, but they'll also try to kind of catch you off your toes, think outside the box. But do be prepared for those common questions, and even just ask your teacher what they would evaluate you on, because in a sense, the judges will kind of be evaluating you in a similar way within the scientific community. So moving on from there, what are the benefits of developing an existing project as opposed to just starting up anew?
So the benefits of developing an existing project, there's many pros. So you can feel more comfortable and in your field, and you can understand more stuff about what you're actually saying. So you can get more in depth basically. But I find that working on a project, especially if you haven't improved that much on it, it can get sort of repetitive and boring for yourself to make if you're not careful enough and not adding enough new stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I think with the project I chose to take further, I saw a clear direction I wanted to develop it. I had a question that wasn't answered that I thought had a lot of relevance to the real world, which is why I decided to continue with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I find really helpful when it comes to starting a new project is kind of giving yourself a cutoff point. Like, let's say I start in August. I want to give myself by end September to decide, am I continuing on with this project or am I starting a new one? That way it's giving you ample time until May or until April, March for your regional fair. And it's also going to give you a good couple of months to decide if your project is valid or if you can find ideas, because sometimes you really have gone as far as the project itself can go, although science, again, is continuously evolving. So it is fairly easy to find those ideas. It's just seeing if you can apply them. But again, give yourself a couple months to go over your project, see if you can continue on with it, but don't be afraid to say, you know what, I'm not really up to this. I think I need to start something else. And by all means, just go on from there, even by using some previous research, but with a whole new idea. So
Yeah,
for your go ahead.
Sorry. There's definitely on some project there's definitely like a good before date. So what you want to do is, I always think there's a way to improve a project, but try to make it fun for yourself. It's really important that you still have love for that project. So if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, it's not really worth it, and it will show once you present it and once you do it. So try to do something you're really passionate about. And if if that project that you did last year, you're still extremely passionate about, and the fire is still going strong, and you still want to add some stuff, then by all means go for it. But always try to keep your passion for it going. Yeah.
And by keeping your passion going, it's also kind of a good self-reflection and deciding if you're still excited about the project, if you still want to continue with it, and also just if you're still excited about the field. Like in high school or even in college and university, you can definitely be like, you know what, I'm so for biology, I want to continue with this project, and then you can get there and be like, you know what, I really want to explore physics or chemistry or something completely different in mathematics. And that's something very normal, and that's why even in post-secondary, a lot of people will actually change programs. So that's, again, just kind of some self-reflection that might be necessary. So have you guys actually come across that where you've actually completely changed your fields, or have you kind of always stayed between the same things?
Well, my science fair projects were very environmental science and biology related, and I tried to integrate those things. And I really enjoyed the projects, and I got a lot out of them. But as a university student, I progressed more towards chemistry than biology, and I think my background with biology through science fair has really helped me, even pursuing in a different field. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that it's great to have a diverse background when you're approaching scientific problems.
Absolutely. And just on a personal note, like I remember I was super into mathematics and I always knew what I was going to pursue. But then throughout high school, I actually discovered completely different fields of biology and chemistry. And that's actually the field I'm studying today in post-secondary. So it just goes to show you that you can completely, change from something to one spectrum like math all the way to the other spectrum of living things in biology. And now moving on from that point, if you guys were to take away 3 main points for stepping up your presentation, for data interpretation, and just how you're going to impact your ideas and your real-world applications, what would those 3 main points be for each of you?
Well, go ahead.
All right. So 3 main points that I would take out is always, stay passionate about your project. That's the first one. And probably the most important one, and not just about your project, but about science in general. So always try to learn new stuff. So that takes me to my second point, which is always keep reading up. Never stay at the same level of knowledge. So always try to implement new data in your mind, basically. And on my third one is always try to, if you're working on a project that you love, always try to find ways to make it better with that new data that you're getting. So always try to keep up to date with the new times and keep working.
Yeah, I think similar to what Farouk said. So for data interpretation, I think really looking into whether or not your results are significant, or if you need to do more tests, and just making sure that your results are scientifically strong, because that's what the judges are really looking for. For presentation, personally, what's always worked for me is just to practice. And even if you're not going to rehearse, or if you like to wing it, that can be great, but I still think you should practice doing that with people so that you have a really strong presentation for the judges. And then in terms of the impact of the project, I think relating it to other studies people have done, so looking into the literature and other scientific papers and seeing how your project will impact people.
And for me, one of them that isn't necessarily based on your presentation or your project, it's to not lose yourself in your project. And what I mean by that is by stepping up your project, you're going to want to work extra hard on it, and you're going to be spending a lot of long days, hours, and even going through late at night trying to, scratch your brain and figure out what you want. So remember kind of to stay true to yourself and to continue to have fun with it, even if you're trying to make it more difficult and bring it to that next level. Another thing is to play around with your data. So see new correlations that you can make. Like, yes, you might have a bunch of different graphs that you really like and you think it's the best way of interpreting your data, but then you might find a new way of analyzing that data, and you'd be like, oh, hey, there's a new way I can actually figure out this, and actually a better way you can present it to your judges. And also always look for groundbreaking research. Sometimes you may feel like it's not there and you don't know how to find it, but it truly it's always there in the scientific community. There's always going to be something that's just came out that scientists are working on. Maybe it's not in your field this year, but within the next years to come, there's always going to be something available to you.
Yeah, I think what Emily said about not getting lost in your project is really important, because I worked on something for 2 years and I was never able to get it to fully work properly, but even then it's still given me way to many other opportunities. So getting into research labs in university, just having that background has been very helpful, even though it wasn't successful at the time with science fair.
Yeah, definitely. I found that I've developed many skills throughout the science fairs that otherwise I wouldn't have developed, and which I find that today my peers don't have. The skills of networking, the skills of actually working on a project and keeping up with it and keep working on it. So not many people have those abilities, and you develop those really early in science fairs, and that's one of the best ways to learn it, I believe. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And again, what to actually invite others to go into your to kind of take a look of your presentation, and remember that science is something that you can share with others, which is another really great thing. So on that note, I'd just like to thank everyone who came in to ask questions, whether it be via Twitter or in the Q&A section. Also remember that you can always ask us questions afterwards, whether it be on Twitter, Facebook, whatever. You can come in contact with us directly, or to anyone at Youth Science Canada, whether it be alumni or on any Facebook group. Good luck and have fun, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.